Daniel, like a lot of other books, named after its principal character. Who is that? Daniel. Okay. There are other examples of that. Ezekiel, Job, Esther, Joshua, Samuel, books of the Old Testament that are really named after their principal characters. Okay. And so the book of Daniel is like that. Last week we talked about Daniel being the key to understanding why things are like they are. And we've been told that we should study Daniel in the context of the circumstances of the Jewish nation at the time the book was written. And we talked about some of those circumstances. The kingdom was gone, right? King was gone. Sanctuary lay desolate. And the people were captives in a strange land, among a people with strange faces and strange languages. Can you imagine that? And so the book of Daniel tells, it's a story of how God is going to right everything that was lost as a result of that captivity, except for restoring the king and the kingdom. Okay? But the book of Daniel also describes the idea that God is going to make a restoration of all that was lost as a result of sin, including the king and the kingdom. And we talked about that. Daniel 2 talks about the restoration of the kingdom, right? In the days of these kings shall God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Daniel 7, the second line of prophecy in Daniel, talks about the restoration of the king. One like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven to where the Father was. And in that judgment that transpires, he's given a kingdom. So the restoration of the king, right? And Daniel 8 and 9, the third outline of prophetic history, Daniel describes this cleansing or the restoration of the sanctuary. That was what was lost too. That was the third one. And Daniel 10 through 12, that last outline, a very complex one, draws everything together and talks about the restoration of the people. We're looking forward to that, aren't we? At that time, it says in Daniel 12, thy people will be delivered. Everyone whose name is found where? Written in the book. We want to make sure our name is written in the book. How does your name get written in the book?
Giving your heart to Christ.
Give your heart to Jesus and do it every day and mean it. We can do that, can't we? The Lord will help us with that one. Without any, he's more interested in saving people than losing people. In fact, he wants everybody to be saved. Every person is predestined to be saved, right? He paid the cost for everyone who ever lived. So, that's Daniel. Now, in Revelation 19:10, it says, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Daniel's a great prophet, right? So what should we expect that the book of Daniel would be about?
Prophecy.
Testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, right? So it's about Jesus, right? Because it's one of the greatest of the prophets. And the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecies. So the spirit of the prophets is what? Uplifting Jesus. And we mentioned last time that the book of Daniel is about restoration. Restoration of what? All that was lost as a result of sin. The kingdom, the king. Who's the king? Jesus. Okay? He's the one whose right it is to rule, it says in Ezekiel 21. The restoration of the kingdom. The restoration of the sanctuary. In fact, we look at that text, Daniel 8:14, it says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Revised Standard Version says, then shall the sanctuary be restored to its rightful place. We said last week that book of Daniel is about the restoration. The theme of the book is restoration. Now, restoration is a really very close related word to salvation, right? So the book is really about something that we're very interested in, especially living in the end time when the world is turned upside down and every uncouth thing is happening. Everybody, did you know it? Notice that everybody's being accused of being a liar today.
Most of them are.
That was on the news today?
Yeah. Everybody's a liar.
It's an epidemic.
It's an epidemic.
It is.
It's an epidemic. It doesn't matter.
Nobody thinks anything of it.
And we're watching a great struggle going on in Washington. The Republicans and the Democrats are trying to kill each other. Never been a divide like this in all the history of the United States.
Yeah.
It's the world's turned upside down. And this is such a time as this, when things get really complex, that the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. Aren't you glad? And we're the eyewitnesses to this. Now, Peter said we were eyewitnesses to all of this. What was he talking about? First century, right?
We've seen it.
They were with Jesus for 3.5 years. They were eyewitnesses. Now we're eyewitnesses. And we're going to see a salvation that will boggle the mind. And so that's what Daniel's about. Daniel was in captivity with his people, and Jerusalem will lay desolate. Daniel's life was such that great rulers were allowed to see God and his love in the life of Daniel, right? His life was like that. Can you think of some of the great rulers that observed Daniel's life and were affected by it? Nebuchadnezzar, the first one we think about, right?
Belshazzar.
Belshazzar,
Darius.
Darius, okay. Anybody else?
Cyrus, too.
How about Cyrus?
Yeah.
You know, Isaiah talks about Cyrus in Isaiah 45, 44, and 45. My tongue is not working too good tonight. Can you see Daniel? Sits down with Cyrus. Cyrus is the emperor now, right? The Medes and Persians. And Daniel is his prime minister. And he says, Cyrus, take a look here. He opens the scroll of Isaiah and says, there's your name. God knows you. My God knows you. You think we might see him in heaven?
It was a couple of hundred years before he was even leader, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Cyrus?
721 or 700s BC. This is at least 100 years, 150 years before, yeah, more than that. 200.
I think it was a couple of hundred years.
You're right, 200. You start
mean that Daniel told Cyrus that?
Yeah,
It was in Isaiah.
Oh, it was in Isaiah.
it's in Isaiah.
Yes.
It's in Isaiah. He probably showed him
Yes.
the Isaiah. It boggled his mind. It talks about the gates and the river being diverted. It talks about things like that.
Yeah.
Cyrus knew all about that because he signed a decree to make that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
To let the Jews go back and do the work of restoration. So Cyrus, I think we might see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven too. Let's read something about that. That's Daniel chapter 4. He affected lives of all those people around him. He was especially accused of being close to his God, praying too much to the God of heaven, right? Instead of Darius. How many times did Daniel pray?
3 times.
3 times a day. He opened his windows to the west, toward Jerusalem, and prayed to God. Okay. Daniel chapter 4. Daniel has observed Nebuchadnezzar for 7 years now. And during those 7 years, what was the problem that Nebuchadnezzar had? He was out there eating grass. He lost his mind.
Right.
Can you see Daniel behind the bushes, kind of watching over him? Daniel's the prime minister, right? So nothing happens to Nebuchadnezzar, because Daniel had a prophecy that it's going to be 7 years and he's going to be restored. And then when he was restored, notice what Nebuchadnezzar had to say. Let's start from 30. Let's start over here with Rose. Daniel chapter 4, 34 to 37. This is Nebuchadnezzar's own testimony. I just can't imagine what it'll be like to see Nebuchadnezzar. Wow. Okay, go ahead and read.
And at the end of the days of Nebuchadnezzar lifted up my eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him and lived forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and in his kingdom from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say unto him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom my honor and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors,
Counselors, uh-huh.
the counselors and my Lord sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellence, majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are true, and his ways judgment, and whose that walk in pride he is able to abase.
Yeah. Amazing testimony from a heathen king. I think we'll see. Yes.
Yeah, in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar calls Daniel by his Hebrew name, Daniel,
Yes.
whose name was Belteshazzar.
Belteshazzar.
Yeah.
And when he is called before Belshazzar at his feast to read writing on the wall, it's the queen mother who says, you ought to call Daniel. She calls him.
She called him that too. Yeah.
And it's a clue, I believe, to the spiritual orientation of the person, whether they call him by his Babylonian name or his Hebrew name.
Yeah.
If they have switched allegiance to the God of heaven, they tend to call him by his Hebrew name.
Indeed.
If they're still following an orientation to Babylonian ways, they tend to call him by his Babylonian name.
Yeah.
And so in previous chapters, Nebuchadnezzar keeps calling him Belteshazzar, Belteshazzar, Belteshazzar.
Yeah.
But now he says, Daniel, whom we named
Yes.
Belteshazzar.
Yeah.
But he first calls him Daniel, and I think it's a clue
Yeah.
that Nebuchadnezzar has truly come around, besides which he wrote this whole chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. He's the author of this chapter. We say Daniel wrote the book of Daniel.
Letter to his
Yeah, this is
employer about what God has done for him.
Yeah.
For 7 years of insanity and the whole experience
Yeah.
of interpreting the dream and whatever.
Yeah.
And so the sense you get from chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar has come around to true faith in the true God,
All the way around.
all the way around.
So notice
I
the.
expect to meet him in heaven, which will be very
Oh yes. Notice verse 1. You want to read that for us, Lamont? Chapter 4, verse 1.
4:1? Nebuchadnezzar, the king to all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you.
What a salutation as he opens this chapter. Okay.
We have to remember how proud Nebuchadnezzar was.
Yes. Yeah.
That this, debasing me wouldn't be a big deal, because, I'm
Yeah.
not much to begin with. But this was an incredibly majestic king, that
Yeah.
very proud and high and mighty.
Yeah.
And I think it nothing less than what he experienced when he lost his
Yeah.
mind
Yeah.
would have convinced him.
Yes. Yeah.
Nothing less than that.
That's right. Is this not great Babylon which I have built with the power of my might? He was a proud king. And God knew that under the right circumstances, he'd give his heart to God, right? So we might call this the gospel according to Daniel, the book of Daniel. Not only talks about how things will be restored again, but along the way, people have observed his life. We won't know until we get to heaven how many were. He was known by a lot of people. And prime minister. He's the only one that I've ever heard of that was the prime minister of 2 world empires. prime minister of two, the first officer under the kings of those places. So anyway, that's Daniel. And the gospel according to Daniel. The book demonstrates God's wisdom, his power, his authority over the nations. Now with that, let's read Daniel 1:1-7. We talked last time about how Daniel is divided into a historical section and a prophetic section, right? The first 6 chapters are generally, except for Daniel, the vision of the image, the first 6 chapters are history. And these stories, like Daniel in the lion's den and the 3 Hebrews in the fiery furnace, are illustrations of the prophecies. We'll see that as we move along. They're illustrations of how God does things. And we can take heart from that. If you're in the lion's den, what are you going to do? One thing you can do is look up, right? Yeah. And God stopped the mouths of the lions. Darius saw that. I wonder what Darius thought about that. Maybe on his deathbed he's a convert too. Yes.
Do you think the first 6 chapters, which are stories,
Yeah.
are there specifically to help God's end-time people who are also going to suffer persecution for
Indeed.
keeping the commandments of God?
Sure. A good example of this might be the chapter 3 about the golden image
The golden image.
and bowing down and worshiping the image. And it's an allusion to who can't see Revelation 13 in that.
Yeah.
And the situation these 3 Hebrew worthies were put into under great stress and duress. Yes.
Yeah, the witness from Daniel himself
Yeah.
comes out very clearly in chapter 6.
Yes.
That's the lion's den.
Yeah.
And when Darius comes out early, probably the first sign of light in the east,
Yeah.
he rushes out to the lion's den and he says, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? He knows that Daniel serves God continually.
Yeah.
The 120 princes know that Daniel serves God continually. They designed the law
Yeah.
around what they knew he would do.
Yeah.
They all know what Daniel is.
Yeah.
They don't know what God is.
Right.
Is your God as good as you? Is your God as good to you as you are towards your God?
Yeah.
That's their question. They know what Daniel is.
Yeah.
And Daniel was a powerful witness. Because, yes, of course he is God. It's even better than that.
Yeah.
That's boggling all their minds
Yeah.
at that point. Because Daniel he's 100% true. And they know.
Yeah.
What
He
they
was
don't know for sure is God.
He was as true to duty as the needle to the pole.
Oh, yeah.
You read that someplace, didn't you, Connie?
I think that the Medo-Persian Empire had heard the stories of Daniel and how Daniel interpreted the king's dream in Daniel chapter 2. I'm sure they had heard the stories of the golden image and how Shadrach, Meshach,
Yep.
and Abednego were thrown in the fiery furnace. I'm sure that story went far and wide.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And one day on the sea of glass, we might be surprised and aghast at the great multitude of people that came as a result of Daniel's witness.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, yes, Jim.
I think not only was the king upset about Daniel, but I think 17 and 18 says he was ticked off that he'd been tricked.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was ticked. He didn't eat, he didn't let anybody dance in
Yeah.
front of him. He went to bed mad,
Yeah.
and he goes, that did it. He thought all night, if Daniel's alive in the morning, I'm gonna kick some behind.
I think so.
I think he actually said
With
that.
wives and kids.
Maybe a Chaldean version of that.
That's, yeah, I want to say it in Greek.
I
but-
I wonder if one of their relatives, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read that text about him putting the wives and kids in the lion's den. I thought, that's a good thing to think about before you marry. Make sure you're marrying the right guy.
Oh, yes. what a multitude of problems people have, and in our Bible studies, we sometimes we were just the other day, Wayne and I. Wayne didn't come tonight. He's been coming to different places, but talking to young people, a couple of young people that we're studying with, and we talked to them about that. Things like practical things like their boyfriend. How does he treat his mom?
That's right.
We talk about these things, and it maybe it'll bear fruit, hopefully. All right.
These lessons that we see, they say, even if God allows me to be consumed or killed, I will stand firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I pray that I will be able to do this
Mm-hmm.
if the time comes to me.
Yeah.
Could it be?
And could well happen.
Yeah.
Could well happen in our
Could
lifetime.
it be that, like the little girl at that
Mhm.
school in Colorado, the
Mhm.
guy put the gun to her head,
Mm-hmm.
do you believe in Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She said yes.
Yeah.
Could it be?
It's all going to come down to,
You could be in
Faith.
a grocery store or something, not
yeah, indeed.
on dessert,
Yeah, exactly. And that was probably a witness to a lot of people around her. There'll be people in the kingdom probably because of that. The book of Daniel demonstrates God's wisdom, power, and authority over the nations. He knows ahead of time of the Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the ones that follow that. There's 7 of them totally. God knew all this in advance, and it should give us great comfort to know that the God that we serve knows everything. He knows the course of our lives and all those things. So let's read Daniel 1:1-7. Did somebody raise their hand here? It seems like I saw a hand come up. Yes, you did.
I just wanted to mention the reason I think the Medo-Persian Empire put Daniel right in the top dog, first
Mhm.
president, is they'd heard these stories.
Yeah.
It had spread.
Yeah.
Something that magnificent would spread.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Here's a man we can trust.
Yeah.
He is true to his God, like the needle to the pole, right? Ellen White talks about that. So that's how we should be, right? As true to duty as the needle to the pole. And okay. So let's read Daniel 1:1-7, then we'll talk about these verses. These are good verses. Tell us about how Daniel happened to be down there. And we'll start here. You want to start reading for us Daniel 1. Why don't you read 3 verses, and Melinda the last 4 verses, okay? Down to 7.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel, and some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles.
Okay, and verses 4-7.
Children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning in the tongue of Chaldees.
Yeah, it says here children. Now, maybe the English language doesn't quite do it, don't cut it here. These were young people.
Youth.
These were youth. And they were young people who were educated. They were some of them of royalty. And, Nebuchadnezzar and his father Nabopolassar had recently overthrown the mighty Assyrian Empire. It had ruled the Middle East for 200 or 300 years. And he needed people. And he was looking for people. because and Palestine just happened to be under his jurisdiction now. He's the emperor. And here's Jehoiakim rebelling, and here's these young people. He's going to take the cream of the crop. Yes.
You know, many of the surrounding nations, and perhaps all of them,
Yeah.
knew of the masterful economics of the Jews.
Yes.
They knew of
They
that.
knew of that.
And they still today are masterful
Even today.
economists.
Even today.
And that's one reason why
Yeah.
they capitalized on these Jewish youth.
Yeah.
Because they knew how sharp they were. They
Yeah.
knew what good economists they were.
Yes. Listen, this is a good time to talk about something. Go ahead.
I was always fascinated with verse 2 in here, because obviously it's under Jehoiakim that all this happened, and that refers back to Ezekiel 21:27 when it says, I will overturn and overturn and overturn.
Yeah.
That was one of those invasions
Yeah.
that specific text is referring to.
Yeah.
From that verse 2 and how God
Right.
happened.
How many overturnings? How many overturnings? Three of them. Jehoiakim first, Jehoiachin, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, M-N. It's alphabetical. It's a way to remember that. Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, second invasion. The third one was Zedekiah. That's when the place was leveled. The city was destroyed. These were relatives of Josiah. In fact, Jehoiakim here was the second son of Josiah. And these invasions happened about 10 years apart. First one about 605 BC, next one about 596, and then 586. That's the date that's generally recognized as the time that Jerusalem was leveled. And this is a good time here. These young men were skillful in wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding of science. Let's go back to 2 Chronicles 36. Hold your finger here, come back. 2 Chronicles chapter 36. Second Chronicles 36. Little interesting sidelight here. Talks about Jehoiakim here. Actually, where I want to go is 34. I don't have this in my notes, and so, but I'd like to have us look at this. Verse 22. This was during the reign of Josiah.
Did you say 34:22?
34:22. And then we're going to come back again to Melinda. You didn't finish it. Okay. I wonder, Mary, would you read this for us? This is 2 Chronicles 34, verse 22.
And
Hilkiah.
Hilkiah and they, the king who appointed, went to Huldah the prophetess, the wife Shallum, the son of Tikva.
I gave you some real good ones, didn't I?
These names.
The son of Hazra, keeper of the word. Now she dwelt in Jerusalem in a college, and they spake to her to that effect.
There was a college in Jerusalem. Interesting idea. It could well be that Jeremiah might have been one of the professors in that college. He was a prophet at some point or another. Jeremiah was old when Daniel was very young, and it was under Jehoiakim when the siege took place and Daniel was taken prisoner, captive down into Babylon. So it talks about young men who are skilled in science and those things. Very likely, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel were students in this college. Probably, a remnant of the schools of the prophets. And can't remember which ones. I think Nahum might have been contemporary. I can't remember exactly. I'll have to go look. He might have had several familiar names as some of his teachers. He could have gone here. We're not told that, but it's at the right time. And Nebuchadnezzar takes the skilled ones, the ones that, he must have done a little research here, Nebuchadnezzar, and some of his cohorts. But Daniel came up in that environment. He was one of those that were taken away. Now, Melinda, chapter 1, Daniel chapter 1 and verse 5, 5 to 7. Chapter 1, Daniel chapter 1.
Verse 5. Okay, I'm there.
And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years at that end thereof, that they may stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and unto the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of
I knew you could handle those names.
Huh?
I knew you could handle those names.
I tried.
And verse 7.
That was verse 7. I just read verse 7. Was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
Yeah.
But I'll reread it for you. Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego.
Yeah.
That's one easy.
Yeah.
Shadrach, Meshach.
Okay, so these young men come down there into the influence of this. Jehoiachin's third year was from the fall of 606 to the fall of 605. The numbers go down.
Yes.
And how would we know that? I looked this one up in the Bible commentary. The spade confirms the book. There have been tablets taken out of Babylon which show that this was the time of Josiah's reign. Evidence from the spade confirms the historical reality of Daniel and the times of Daniel. You know, there was a time when people were saying, you know, Daniel never really lived back in the 6th century BC or the 5th century BC. They said, well, he couldn't have known all of this. He would have had to have been more down in, much later. But yes, the tablets that have been discovered put Daniel, the time of Daniel, in its proper perspective. You can find that in the SDA Bible commentary under Daniel. And that verse, yes.
One of the things, studying for my other Bible study,
Mm-hmm.
I read, and I can't remember which book it is that I was reading, but to counteract the theory that Daniel couldn't have known, this is so accurate that there's no way he could have written it, was that the Babylonians tortured and executed people in the furnace, but the Medo-Persians saw fire as one of their gods, and they wouldn't execute people using fire.
Interesting.
So they used wild animals.
Okay.
Often lions.
Lions,
And
okay, yeah.
somebody who wasn't actually there living it wouldn't have necessarily known that.
Interesting.
That was interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that Daniel lived in the times. The times of Daniel are very accurate in the Bible. So Jehoiakim, the second son of Josiah, he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, the empire builder, who with his father overthrew the Assyrians. And Judah comes under the control now of that empire, Nebuchadnezzar's empire, under his jurisdiction. An empire to administer. No wonder he looked for good people. He probably needed a lot of them. And like you said, the Jews probably were prime, and that was probably pretty well known.
They were renowned for that.
Yeah.
A lot of people resented it,
Yeah.
as they do today.
Yes. And perhaps along with many other the captives who were very skilled. Nebuchadnezzar's presence in Palestine was in the early summer of 605 BC. His father died in August of 605. We know this from things that they've discovered. Wouldn't have to go to the Bible for this.
Didn't they
doubt that David existed too? until
Well,
they
I
found
think I've heard that,
like a
yes.
tablet that
Yeah, yeah,
mentioned King David?
yeah. Mentions his name, and that he lived in the 900s BC and so forth, yeah. So, archaeology has done a lot to confirm the book that we put our faith in. So, clay tablets from Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar succeeded his father, Nabopolassar. Say that with me. Nabopolassar. I think that's a wonderful name. Don't you think so? Nabopolassar. That's Nebuchadnezzar's father. I think prior to this time, while the Assyrians were ruling, Babylon was kind of a city-state, and they had a lot of strength. And I don't think they bothered the city of Babylon very much. But when the time came, and Nebuchadnezzar and his father, they decided to clean up on the Assyrians, and that was the end of them as an empire. So kind of interesting history. We read here about the vessels that were taken. Probably the most valuable and most precious were taken. And they were to be used in the worship of God. Marduk, I should say. Yeah. And so we can read about, let's go back to 2 Chronicles 36 again. 2 Chronicles 36. There's those last chapters of 2 Chronicles are good to compare with Daniel, the first chapter of Daniel. 2 Chronicles 36, verse 7. I don't want to get so detailed here that we get bogged down. But I think a little bit of the history and background of some of the things that follow are kind of important.
Wasn't the ark, though, hidden from the Babylonians? So
Well,
they haven't had the ark since the time of the Babylonians?
No. Jeremiah apparently secreted it in a cave someplace. And they're still kind of looking. There's a lot of conjecture as to where it might be today, but yeah, some of them think it's maybe Jeremiah might have taken it down to Mount Horeb, Some think it's hidden there in a cave in Jerusalem. And some have speculated about things that they found that maybe that somebody found it and there was some terrible firecrackers went off and they had to withdraw themselves, all kinds of stuff. But one of these days, I think that it will probably be brought forth.
You think it'll come up?
I think it'll be brought forth, yeah. But anyway, yes.
What about if you found them doing this wall? I think it would stop you right away.
Okay, 2 Chronicles 36, verse 7. And you want to read that for us, Barry? 2 Chronicles 36, verse 7.
Nebuchadnezzar also carried off the vessels of the house of the Lord of Babylon and put them in the temple at Babylon. Now, at the rest of the acts of Jerusalem, Jerusalem and his abominations which he did, and that which was found in him, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of the Israel and Judah.
Yeah. Verse 7, it says that he took those vessels, those costly golden vessels, no doubt, put them in the house of his temple, and used them for the worship of his God. Yes.
Well, in those days, if my army defeats your army,
Yeah.
I would think that my God also defeated your God.
Yeah.
And so I would take your God, the idol of your God, and take it to my country, put it in my temple, as a servant God to my God, a captive, a hostage God to my God.
Yeah.
And you're not treating them entirely disrespectfully, but
Yeah.
these are captive gods.
Yeah.
Right? And if you look back to the story of the ark taken by the Philistines, where they put it in the temple of Dagon, their god, who, by the way, did not win against the God of heaven, because the next morning the God of heaven has him bowing down before him. But Dagon's bowing down to God.
Yeah.
They put Dagon back up. The next day he's bowing down to God again. They said, I think we better take that.
Yeah,
Because they got the idea
yeah,
that the God of Israel was not actually under the
Yep.
control of their God. But the Babylonians hadn't figured that out. They're
Right.
going to learn it. They'll learn it a different way than the Philistines did. But that was what they often did. And so when they took the things from the temple in Jerusalem, they're really saying, your God lost to our God. Now your God will serve our God. Your God will be a prisoner, a captive to our God. And that's why they put the stuff there. Now, they didn't get the ark, or they would have taken it too.
and the God of heaven is looking down, and he says, well, we'll see about that.
Yeah, we'll see.
You know, these are the circumstances. What were these are the circumstances that surrounded, that evolved because God's people rejected who?
God.
God. And who was God's messenger during this time? Jeremiah. The whole book of Jeremiah is about this. They rejected. You know, it's important that we believe God's prophets, right? They took Jeremiah and put him in a pit. They tormented him and made fun of him. Let's turn to 2 Chronicles 20:20. This is Chronicles are 2 Chronicles a good corollary to what we're studying here tonight. 2 Chronicles 20:20. I can't believe how the time goes. Maybe I don't have the right one. Yeah, I do. Verse 20. Let's see here. Where are we? Paul, you want to read that one? 2 Chronicles 20:20. There's a story involved here, and but the last part of this verse is what I wanted to have us look at.
Okay. So, and he rose up early in the morning and went forth into the wilderness to, what is it?
Tekoa.
Tekoa. And as they went forth, Jehoshaphat stood and said, Hear me, O Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall ye be established. Believe in his prophets, so ye would be prophet.
Yeah. You think that's still true today?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. They changed gods. And they changed gods because they changed God's spokesman. They rebuked God's spokesman. And so here we are today, 2,500 years later. And we need to pay attention to God's prophets. And not only the prophets of the Bible, but the prophet to the remnant. So our time is up tonight. Are there, so far, so good, right? How, have any comments? Anybody have some comments before we close this
I
up?
wanted to
Yeah.
ask a question, but it was on a stick comment that Jim made. And you mentioned about the 120 princes in the book of Daniel, which Daniel was responsible for. But in the book of Esther, I think it's chapter 1, it speaks of 7 other princes, and it talks about they only saw the face of the king. My question was, I was just wondering, did they not report to Daniel, or do you know, or because why Esther mentions 127 and the book of Daniel mentions only the 120?
I wonder if it was a different time.
Yeah, different
Well, they
was-
were there all at the same time.
Quite a few years later.
How many?
Quite a few years later.
It's several kings later that has
Yeah.
to come
Yeah.
out, I think.
But maybe it's
Daniel's probably off.
Media Persia, and those 7 kings,
It's
those
still
7.
Medo-Persia.
Yeah.
And I think they still have 120.
So those 7 have nothing to do with the 120. They weren't.
Yeah.
They report to Daniel.
Well, in Daniel's day, they have the 120 princes, and then they had 3 supervisory presidents. They call
Okay.
them. Now, in the book of Esther, I'm not as familiar with that, but then if they have 7 there, that's probably equivalent to the 3 of whom Daniel is the chief, or at least he was one of them, and the king's going to make him the chief.
Okay.
So those are the guys that supervise the 120. And they probably have 7 supervising the 120.
I got that confused in verse 14, I think, in chapter 1 in Esther.
Yeah.
I was just wondering where the other 7 came from.
Yeah.
Of course, they're the supervisors over the 120, I believe.
Thank you.
Daniel had been gone now for a long time, several kings later. In the days when Daniel was prime minister and thrown into the lion's den, he may have been a man up in his 90s by that time. He was already retired in Babylon when Belshazzar came along, still in Babylon, and now they made use of him again. And so it's quite a bit later. I don't know, maybe several kings later. Was it Ahasuerus that was in Esther's time? Yeah, yeah. So things might have changed, you know, several kings later. I don't know. Any other thoughts? Well,
I wish we had a timeline so I wouldn't get confused.
It is confusing.
it is, yeah. We're talking about some ancient history.
You have to look at the dates on, look at the dates on Esther. What was that?
Some of these Bibles have dates, yeah. Some of these
I
Bibles,
don't have that Bible.
we don't have that Bible with
I don't
me.
even read that Bible with the new people here. Until the page number.
What's it? Esther was a 521 BC.
521. See, that's probably 80 years later, 90 years later. Yeah. Okay. Well, Pastor Jim, would you pray for us?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Father, we thank you for giving us your word, for all that it tells us of the past as well as the future. And when we look at the things in the book of Daniel, we're encouraged by the experiences of their life, and we're challenged by the prophecies that he wrote. We know that you have our good in mind when you gave that to us, and we thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.
So Daniel is still witnessing to us today, isn't he? Not only to his contemporaries, but to us as well. So we're going to have a good